The auction block smelled of sweat and fear. Connor McKay stood in chains with 11 other men, all prisoners taken during the raid on his cattle drive 3 days ago. His hands were bound, his clothes torn and bloody, his pride shattered. 28 years old, a cowboy who'd been driving cattle from Texas to New Mexico, now reduced to property being sold to the highest bidder. This was April of 1858, a time when the rules of civilization ended where the frontier began, and power belonged to whoever could take it and keep it. The Apache had attacked at dawn, overwhelming the small group of drovers with precise military efficiency. Most of Connor's companions had been killed in the first minutes of fighting. The survivors, including Connor, had been taken prisoner and marched for 2 days into Apache territory. Now they stood in what appeared to be a trading post, a neutral ground where Apache, Mexican, and renegade American traders gathered to exchange goods that couldn't be sold in civilized territories, including human beings. Connor had heard stories about these places but never believed they actually existed. Now he was living proof. The auctioneer, a Mexican man with gold teeth and dead eyes, was calling out bids in 3 languages. The prisoners would be sold as laborers, servants, or worse. Connor watched as the man next to him, a young drover named Billy, was purchased by a cruel-looking rancher for $40. Billy was led away in chains, his face pale with terror. Connor would be next. But as the auctioneer began describing Connor's attributes, strong back, good teeth, experience with cattle and horses, a voice cut through the crowd, a woman's voice speaking in Apache with unmistakable authority. The crowd parted like water around a stone, and through that opening walked the most striking woman Connor had ever seen. She was Apache, perhaps 30 years old, tall and regal in bearing. She wore traditional dress elaborately decorated with beadwork and silver, but it was her presence that commanded attention. She moved like someone who'd never questioned her right to occupy any space she chose. The auctioneer's expression changed immediately from bored professionalism to nervous deference. He bowed slightly as she approached the platform. The woman ignored him entirely, her dark eyes fixed on Connor with an intensity that made his skin prickle. She walked around him slowly, studying him from every angle like she was evaluating a horse for purchase. Connor forced himself to meet her gaze, refusing to look down despite his chains and humiliation. If he was going to be sold like cattle, at least he'd face it with whatever dignity remained. The woman spoke to the auctioneer in Apache. Connor didn't understand the words, but he caught the tone. This wasn't a question or a negotiation. This was a command. The auctioneer nodded rapidly, sweat beading on his forehead. He called out something to the crowd, his voice high and nervous. No one bid against her. No one dared. The woman produced a leather pouch and counted out coins, more money than Connor had seen any of the other prisoners fetch. She handed it to the auctioneer, who accepted it with trembling hands. Then she turned to Connor and spoke in perfect English that made his eyes widen with surprise. "You belong to me now. If you try to escape, my warriors will hunt you down and kill you slowly. If you try to fight me, they will do worse. But if you are smart, if you learn quickly, you may find that belonging to me is better than any freedom you've known. Do you understand?" Connor's throat was dry. "I understand." "Good," the woman said. She gestured to 2 warriors who immediately stepped forward and removed Connor's chains. His wrists were raw and bleeding where the iron had cut into flesh. The woman noticed this and said something in Apache. One of the warriors produced a leather wrap and bound Connor's wrists with surprising gentleness. Then the woman turned and walked toward the exit, clearly expecting Connor to follow. He had no choice. He fell into step behind her, very aware of the armed warriors surrounding them on all sides. They left the trading post and walked to where horses were waiting. The woman mounted her horse with fluid grace, then looked down at Connor. "You can ride?" "Yes, ma'am," Connor replied. "Then mount. We have a long journey." A warrior handed Connor the reins to a sturdy paint horse. He mounted carefully, his body aching from 3 days of rough treatment. The woman watched him critically, evaluating his horsemanship. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded once and turned her horse toward the mountains. They rode for hours through terrain that grew increasingly rugged and beautiful. Connor had never been this deep into Apache territory before. No white man had, not without permission. He should have been terrified, but instead he felt a strange calm settling over him. Whatever was going to happen would happen. Fighting it would only make things worse. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, they arrived at a village unlike any Connor had expected. It wasn't a temporary camp of Tippus. It was a permanent settlement built into the side of a canyon with structures made of adobe and stone, irrigation channels bringing water from a hidden spring, fields where crops grew in neat rows. The village showed signs of prosperity and organization that challenged everything Connor had been taught about Apache people. The woman dismounted and handed her horse to a young boy who'd run up to greet her. She spoke to him in Apache, her tone warm and affectionate. The boy grinned and led the horse away. Then she turned to Connor, her expression becoming serious again. "Welcome to my home. I am Desba, chief of this tribe. My name means goes to war. My husband was killed 2 years ago in a battle with Mexican soldiers. Since then, I have led our people alone." She paused. "Until now." Connor felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What do you mean, until now?" Desba smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I mean that a chief without a visible consort is seen as weak by neighboring tribes. I mean that I purchased you to solve a political problem. I mean that by sunrise tomorrow, you will be my husband, and I will no longer be a widow ruling alone." The words hit Connor like a physical blow. "You bought me to marry you." "I bought you to stand beside me as consort," Desba corrected. "Whether that becomes a true marriage or merely a political arrangement is up to you." Connor's mind raced. "And if I refuse? Then you will be sold to someone else, probably to work in the silver mines where life expectancy is measured in months, not years." Desba's expression remained neutral. "I am offering you an opportunity, Cowboy. I need a consort to strengthen my political position. You need protection and a place in this world. We can help each other, or you can choose the mines. Your decision." Connor looked around at the village, at the armed warriors watching their conversation, at the impossible situation he'd found himself in. "That's not really a choice." "No," Desba agreed, "it's not, but it's more of a choice than most prisoners get. I could have simply declared you my husband without asking. The fact that I'm explaining the situation is a courtesy." She stepped closer, her dark eyes searching his face. "I will not force myself on you, if that's your fear. The marriage will be political only until and unless you choose otherwise. You will have your own quarters, your own space. All I require is that you stand beside me in public, show the other tribes that I have a strong consort, and help me maintain my authority." Connor took a deep breath. "And if I agree to this arrangement?" "Then you will be treated as royalty, not as a slave," Desba said. "You will eat well, dress well, learn our ways. You will be protected by my warriors and respected by my people. In time, if you prove worthy, you may even have genuine authority here." She paused. "I chose you specifically, Cowboy. From all the prisoners at that auction, I chose you because I saw something in your eyes. Pride, courage, intelligence. These are qualities I need in a consort. Don't waste them by being foolish." Connor thought about Billy, the young drover who'd been sold to the cruel rancher. Thought about the other prisoners who'd disappeared to unknown fates. Thought about the silver mines Desba had mentioned. And he thought about this strange, powerful woman who spoke perfect English and ruled her people with obvious skill. "I'll do it," Connor said. "I'll be your consort." Desba nodded, as if she'd never doubted his answer. "Good. Come, I'll show you where you'll sleep tonight. Tomorrow will be a long day." She led him through the village, and Connor became aware of people stopping to stare. They whispered to each other in Apache, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to outright hostility. Desba ignored them all, walking with her head high, projecting absolute confidence. She brought Connor to a well-built adobe structure near the center of the village. "These are my quarters. You'll have the room on the east side. I'll have the west. There's a common area between." Inside, the home was surprisingly comfortable. Woven rugs covered the floors, pottery decorated the walls, a fire pit provided warmth and light. Desba showed Connor to his room, which contained a bed, a chest for clothing, and a small window overlooking the canyon. It was simple but clean, infinitely better than chains and an auction block. "Someone will bring you food and clean clothes," Desba said. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow we will perform the ceremony that makes you my husband in the eyes of my people and the neighboring tribes." She turned to leave, then paused. "Connor McKay, that's your name, yes? I heard the auctioneer say it." "Yes, ma'am," Connor replied. "Just Connor is fine." Connor, Desba repeated, testing the sound. It means lover of hounds in your language, I believe. An odd name. She smiled slightly. My people will give you a new name tomorrow, something more appropriate for a chief's consort. After she left, Connor sat on the bed and tried to process everything that had happened. 3 days ago, he'd been a free man driving cattle across open range. Now he was in an Apache village, purchased like property, about to become the consort of a woman who ruled through a combination of intelligence and intimidation. It was insane. It was impossible. And somehow, looking around his new quarters, Connor felt the first stirring of something that wasn't quite hope, but wasn't despair either. Possibility, maybe. The chance that this nightmare might become something else entirely. If you're enjoying this story of an impossible situation in the Old West, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about power and partnership. Connor woke before dawn to find someone had left new clothes outside his door. Traditional Apache clothing, carefully made to fit him. Deerskin pants and shirt decorated with intricate beadwork, moccasins that fit perfectly, a woven belt. He dressed slowly, feeling strange in these foreign garments, like he was putting on a costume for a play he hadn't auditioned for. When he emerged from his room, he found Desba already awake, preparing something over the fire. She looked up and studied him critically. The clothes fit well. You look almost Apache. She gestured for him to sit. Eat. The ceremony will be long, and you'll need strength. Connor sat and accepted the food she offered. Some kind of cornmeal porridge with dried fruit and nuts. It was simple but filling. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Connor found the courage to speak. Desba, can I ask you something? You may ask, I may choose not to answer. Why me, really? There were other men at that auction, stronger men. Why did you choose a cowboy who knows nothing about your people? Desba was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before. My husband was a great warrior, brave, strong, respected, but he was also proud and inflexible. He made decisions without consulting me, dismissed my counsel because I was a woman. When he died, I took leadership because our people needed someone strong. But many of the older warriors resented taking orders from a woman. They challenged me constantly, tested me, waited for me to fail. She looked directly at Connor. I don't need another proud warrior who will fight me for authority. I need someone who understands he's here because I chose him. Someone who will support me rather than undermine me. Someone smart enough to learn our ways, but not so arrogant as to think he knows better. And you think I'm that person? Connor asked. I think you could be, Desba replied. You stood in chains on an auction block with dignity. You looked me in the eye when most men would have looked down in fear. You asked intelligent questions instead of making stupid threats. These things tell me you have wisdom that many stronger men lack. She paused. Also, you're white. That makes you neutral in tribal politics. The warriors can't claim you favor one family over another because you have no tribal connections. It makes you perfect for my purposes. Connor absorbed this. So I'm a political tool. We're all tools of circumstance, Desba said. The question is whether we're used well or poorly. I intend to use you well, Connor McKay, and if you're smart, you'll let me. The ceremony began at sunrise. Connor was led to the center of the village, where a large circle had been formed. The entire tribe seemed to be present, hundreds of people watching with expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. Connor's stomach churned with nervousness, but he forced himself to stand tall. Desba appeared wearing elaborate ceremonial dress that marked her status as chief. She carried herself with such authority that even the hostile observers seemed to shrink back slightly. An elderly man, clearly a spiritual leader of some kind, began speaking in Apache. Connor understood nothing but tried to look respectful and attentive. The ceremony involved smoke, prayers, and the exchange of symbolic gifts. Desba gave Connor a knife with an intricately carved handle, a weapon that clearly held significance. In return, he was supposed to give her something, but he had nothing. The moment stretched awkwardly until Connor made a decision. He pulled off his worn leather gloves, the only personal possession he still had from his old life, and offered them to Desba. She looked at the gloves, then at Connor, something flickering in her eyes that might have been respect. She accepted them gravely and said something in Apache that made several people in the crowd nod approvingly. The ceremony continued with more prayers and rituals. At one point, Desba and Connor's hands were bound together with a braided cord, symbolizing their union. Her skin was warm against his, her grip firm and steady. When the elderly man finally finished his prayers, Desba turned to Connor and spoke in English for everyone to hear. "By the laws of our people, you are now my husband. You will be called Nasha, which means owl. You are wise enough to see in darkness, to understand things others miss. You are now consort to the chief, second in authority to me alone. Anyone who harms you harms me. Anyone who disrespects you disrespects me. Do you accept this role and all it requires?" Connor looked at the hundreds of faces watching him, waiting for his response. He thought about freedom, about his old life, about the impossibility of this moment. Then he thought about the silver mines and the cruelty he'd seen at the auction. And he made his choice. "I accept," Connor said clearly. A ripple went through the crowd. Some people looked pleased. Others looked angry. Most just looked confused. Desba untied the cord binding their hands and raised both their arms together, presenting them to the tribe as a united pair. The gesture was clear. Challenge one, challenge both. The crowd began to disperse, though Connor noticed several older warriors staring at him with undisguised hostility. One in particular, a scarred man with cold eyes, said something to Desba in Apache that sounded like a challenge. Desba's response was sharp and cutting. The warrior's face darkened, but he turned and walked away. "What was that about?" Connor asked quietly. "That was Kuruk, my late husband's brother. He believes he should have become chief when his brother died. He sees you as proof of my weakness, bringing in a white outsider rather than choosing an Apache warrior." Desba's expression was neutral, but Connor could sense tension beneath. "Will he cause trouble?" "Probably," Desba said, "but that's not your concern. Your role is to stand beside me and look confident. Leave the politics to me." Over the next few weeks, Connor learned exactly what being a chief's consort meant. It meant endless meetings where he understood nothing but had to look authoritative. It meant learning Apache customs and language with painful slowness while everyone watched for mistakes. It meant standing beside Desba at councils and ceremonies, always aware that he was being judged by people who resented his presence. But it also meant learning about Apache culture in ways few white men ever had. Connor discovered that the Apache people were not the savage raiders he'd been taught about. They were farmers and craftspeople, storytellers and healers. They had complex laws and deep traditions. They valued honor, courage, and loyalty above almost everything else. And they were fighting desperately to maintain their way of life against encroaching settlers and an increasingly aggressive American military. Connor found himself gaining unexpected respect for these people he'd been taught to fear. Desba was a patient but demanding teacher. She corrected his Apache pronunciation mercilessly, made him practice traditional crafts until his hands were raw, and expected him to remember complicated protocols for different ceremonies. But she also explained the reasons behind customs, helped him understand the political complexities of tribal leadership, and occasionally showed flashes of dry humor that made the hard work bearable. One evening, about a month after the ceremony, Connor was practicing beadwork under Desba's critical eye when she suddenly laughed. The sound was so unexpected that Connor looked up in surprise. "What's funny?" he asked. "You are," Desba said, still smiling. "A month ago you were a cowboy who probably thought all Indians were bloodthirsty savages. Now you sit in my home carefully stitching beads onto leather and arguing with me about proper ceremonial protocols. If your former companions could see you now, they wouldn't recognize you." Connor looked down at his work, realizing she was right. He barely recognized himself. "Have I changed that much?" "Yes," Desba said simply. "You've become Nasha, the owl who sees in darkness. Connor McKay is someone you used to be." The thought should have been disturbing, but somehow it wasn't. Connor realized that the man he'd been, the cowboy drifting from job to job with no real purpose, had been lost long before the Apache raid. Maybe that man had needed to die so someone better could emerge. "What about you?" Connor asked. "Have you changed?" Desba considered the question seriously. "Yes, I thought having a consort would solve my political problems. Instead, it created new ones. Kuruk and his followers are more hostile than before. Several neighboring tribes question my judgment. And you," she paused, "you are not what I expected." "In a good way or a bad way?" Connor asked carefully. "Both," Desba admitted. "You learn faster than I anticipated. You show more courage. You don't try to dominate or undermine me." But you also ask too many questions, challenge my decisions when you think I'm wrong, and generally refuse to be the passive consort I thought I was purchasing." She met his eyes. "I'm not sure yet whether that's a problem or an asset." Connor set down his beadwork. "Desba, can I be honest with you?" "Always," she said. "This arrangement, this marriage, it started as a transaction. You needed a consort for political reasons. I needed to avoid the silver mines. But over these past weeks, I've come to respect you, not just as a leader, though you're clearly brilliant at that, but as a person. You're smart and strong and fair. You care about your people deeply. And I think," he struggled to find the words, "I think if circumstances were different, if we'd met some other way, I'd have wanted to know you anyway." Desba was very still, her expression unreadable. "That's a dangerous thing to say, Connor." "Why?" "Because it makes this complicated. Because it changes a simple political arrangement into something messier. Because—" She stopped, then started again. "Because I've been thinking similar things and I don't know what to do about it." The admission hung in the air between them. Connor felt his heart beating faster. "So what do we do?" Desba stood and walked to the window, looking out over her village. "We continue as we have been. You learn our ways. I manage tribal politics. We present a united front to our people and our rivals. And we don't speak of this again until we're certain what we want." It was a practical answer, a chief's answer, but Connor heard something else beneath the words. Fear, maybe, or hope, or both. 2 months after Connor's arrival, the crisis Desba had been anticipating finally came. Kuruk challenged her leadership openly at a tribal council. He stood before the assembled warriors and elders and declared that Desba was unfit to lead, that her choice of a white consort proved she'd lost touch with Apache values, that the tribe needed a real warrior chief, not a woman playing at power with a white man at her side. The words were calculated to inflame, to divide, to force a confrontation Desba couldn't avoid. Connor watched her face as Kuruk spoke, saw the fury carefully controlled beneath her calm exterior. When Kuruk finished his challenge, silence fell across the council. Everyone waited for Desba's response. She stood slowly, her bearing regal despite the insult. She spoke in Apache, her voice carrying clearly, each word precise and cutting. Connor's language skills had improved enough that he caught the gist. She was listing everything she'd accomplished as chief. The treaties negotiated, the prosperity brought to the tribe, the enemies defeated without pointless loss of life. Then she said something that made several people gasp. She was challenging Kuruk to single combat. If he truly believed she was unfit to lead, let him prove it with weapons. Winner takes leadership. Connor's blood ran cold. He'd seen Kuruk practice with weapons. The man was a formidable fighter, scarred from dozens of battles. Desba was skilled, but she was also smaller and lighter. In a fair fight, Kuruk would probably win. But before anyone could respond to her challenge, Connor did something completely unexpected. He stood and spoke in halting Apache, using phrases Desba had taught him over the past months. "I claim substitution right." The council erupted. People shouted questions, argued over protocols, demanded clarification. Connor didn't understand half of it, but he kept his eyes on Desba. She looked shocked, then angry, then something else he couldn't quite read. The eldest council member, a woman named Casa, called for silence. She spoke to Connor in Apache, her tone questioning. Connor responded as best he could, knowing his grammar was probably terrible but hoping his meaning was clear. As consort, he had the right to fight in Desba's place if her honor was challenged. Casa turned to the other elders for consultation. The debate was rapid and heated. Finally, she nodded and spoke to the whole council. The substitution right was valid. Connor would fight Kuruk for leadership of the tribe. Kuruk looked furious but also pleased. Killing the white consort would be almost as satisfying as defeating Desba herself. The fight was set for the following morning. After the council disbanded, Desba grabbed Connor's arm and pulled him back to their quarters. Once inside, she turned on him with barely controlled rage. "What were you thinking? You can't beat Kuruk. He's been training for war since childhood." "I know," Connor said calmly. "Then why did you claim substitution, right? Why throw your life away?" "Because you would have won the fight but lost the war," Connor explained. "If you killed Kuruk, his followers would never accept your leadership. There would be division, possibly civil war. The tribe would tear itself apart." He stepped closer. "But if I fight him, if I lose, you're still chief." Kuruk gets to demonstrate his superiority over your white consort, saves face, maybe backs down. And if I somehow win? You won't win, Desba said flatly. Maybe not, Connor agreed. But I had to try, because over these past 2 months this has stopped being about avoiding the silver mines. You asked me to stand beside you, to support you. That's what I'm doing. Desba stared at him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she grabbed his face with both hands and kissed him. It was desperate and fierce, full of fear and anger, and something else that had been building between them for weeks. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. You foolish, impossible man, she whispered. I was starting to... She stopped. If you die tomorrow, I will never forgive you. Then help me not die, Connor said. You're a brilliant strategist. Help me find a way to beat him. Desba took a shaky breath, forcing herself back into control. Kuruk is stronger and more experienced, but he's also arrogant. He'll expect you to fight like a white man, all power and no strategy. If you fight like an Apache, if you use tactics he doesn't expect, you might have a chance. A small chance. They spent the entire night preparing. Desba taught Connor specific techniques, ways to use an opponent's strength against them. She showed him vulnerable points on the human body, places where even a lighter fighter could do serious damage with precise strikes, and she told him something that gave him hope. In Apache combat tradition, the fight ended when one participant yielded or could no longer continue. Death was possible, but not required. If Connor could hurt Kuruk badly enough to end his ability to fight without killing him, honor would be satisfied and leadership secured. As dawn approached, Connor and Desba stood together outside their quarters, watching the sky lighten. Whatever happens today, Connor said quietly, I want you to know that these 2 months have been the most meaningful of my life. You've given me purpose, taught me strength, shown me who I could be instead of who I was. Desba took his hand, the first time she'd initiated such contact since their marriage ceremony. When I bought you at that auction, I thought I was purchasing a political tool. Instead, I found... She struggled with the words. I found someone who sees me, not just as a chief, not just as a woman, but as both, as a whole person. That's rare, Connor. Rare enough that I won't let Kuruk take it from me without a fight. Then let's make sure he doesn't, Connor said. The entire tribe gathered for the combat. A circle was formed, weapons were chosen, standard Apache fighting knives, short and wickedly sharp. Kuruk stood on one side of the circle, confident and relaxed. Connor stood on the other, trying to project more confidence than he felt. Desba spoke to the assembled tribe, explaining the rules and stakes. Then she looked directly at Connor and said something in Apache that he'd learned to recognize. May the wisest warrior win. The fight began with Kuruk's confident advance. He moved like a man who'd done this hundreds of times, his footwork perfect, his blade positioned to exploit any opening. Connor remembered Desba's instructions. Don't meet strength with strength. Use movement, angles, patience. Let him attack first. Kuruk struck fast, a feint followed by a real slash aimed at Connor's ribs. Connor twisted away, using the movement Desba had shown him, and felt the blade whisper past his shirt instead of through it. The crowd murmured. Kuruk's eyes narrowed. He'd expected the white man to be easy prey. Connor kept moving, staying light on his feet, remembering every lesson from the past night. Kuruk attacked again, more aggressively this time. Connor dodged, blocked, redirected. He wasn't trying to win yet, just trying to survive, trying to tire his opponent, trying to wait for the opening Desba had promised would come. It came 5 minutes into the fight. Kuruk overextended on a powerful slash, his weight too far forward. Connor did exactly what Desba had taught him. He dropped low, swept Kuruk's leading leg, and as the bigger man fell, Connor's knife found the vulnerable spot behind Kuruk's knee, severing tendons with surgical precision. Kuruk screamed and collapsed, his leg no longer able to support weight. Connor stepped back, bloodied knife raised, waiting to see if Kuruk would yield. The warrior tried to stand but couldn't. His leg was finished, his fighting ability ended. He would live, but he would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. Slowly, painfully, Kuruk spoke the words that ended the combat. He yielded. Connor had won. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheered, some stood in shocked silence, some looked angry. But the result was undeniable. The white consort had defeated the tribe's greatest warrior. Desba walked into the circle and raised Connor's hand in victory. Then she did something that surprised everyone. She helped Kuruk to his feet, supporting his weight, showing him respect despite his challenge. She spoke to him in Apache, her words carrying clearly. Connor's improved language skills caught enough to understand. She was offering Kuruk a place in her council, acknowledging his strength and experience, giving him honor instead of humiliation. It was brilliant politics. By showing mercy and respect to her defeated rival, Desba transformed a potential enemy into a grudging ally. Kuruk's response was gruff, but he nodded acceptance. The crisis was over. Over the following weeks, something fundamental shifted in how the tribe viewed Connor. He was no longer just the white consort purchased for political convenience. He was the warrior who defeated Kuruk, the man brave enough to risk his life for his chief. Warriors who'd been hostile before began treating him with cautious respect. And gradually, organically, the political marriage began transforming into something real. Connor and Desba stopped maintaining separate rooms. They began finishing each other's sentences, making decisions together, moving through their days with the synchronized ease of true partners. The physical attraction that had sparked between them bloomed into genuine love, built on mutual respect, shared challenges, and the gradual realization that they'd each found something precious in the last place they expected to look. 6 months after Connor's arrival, as they lay together one night, Desba spoke softly in the darkness. "Do you ever regret it? That day at the auction when I bought you?" Connor was quiet for a moment. "Every day for the first week. Then occasionally for the next month. Then not at all." He turned to face her. "You saved my life that day, whether you intended to or not. You gave me purpose, family, a place to belong. You made me a king when I'd been reduced to cattle. How could I regret that?" Desba smiled, the real smile she only showed when they were alone. "I thought I was buying a tool. Instead, I found a partner, found love in the last place I thought to look for it." "We're quite a pair," Connor said. "The Apache Queen and the Cowboy King." The chief and her consort, Desba corrected, but her tone was warm. "My people will never see you as king, not truly. You'll always be Nasha, the owl, the outsider who somehow became one of us." "I can live with that," Connor said. "As long as I'm beside you." They lived together for 37 years, leading their tribe through times of war and peace, prosperity and hardship. Connor never fully lost his status as outsider, but he earned enough respect that his counsel was valued and his authority accepted. He and Desba had 4 children who grew up bridging 2 worlds, learning both Apache and white ways, preparing for a future where such flexibility would be essential. When Desba died at age 67, Connor was holding her hand. She'd led her people with wisdom and strength for over 4 decades, and she left them prosperous and united. Her last words to Connor, spoken in English because that had always been the private language between them, were simple. "Thank you for being brave enough to let me buy you. Thank you for being wise enough to become who I needed. Thank you for loving me." Connor lived another 5 years after Desba's death, helping their eldest daughter transition into leadership. When he finally passed, the tribe gave him full Apache burial honors, something unprecedented for a white outsider. His grave was placed beside Desba's, 2 leaders who'd started as captive and captor, but ended as true partners. The story of Connor and Desba became legend among their people. The cowboy who was sold at auction and became a chief's consort. The queen who bought a husband and found a true partner. The impossible love that transformed both of them and helped guide a tribe through one of the most difficult periods in Apache history. Because that's what they built on a spring morning in 1858, a partnership that began with chains and an auction block, but became something rare and beautiful. Proof that love can emerge from the strangest circumstances, that power can be shared instead of fought over, and that sometimes being sold to a queen is exactly what a cowboy needs to become a king. Now click on the video on the screen to hear another story of impossible transformations in the Old West, where one person's courage changed not just their own fate, but the fate of an entire community.